Hello and welcome to today's video where we're showing you how to make this match day graphic. But before we get into things, over 75% of you aren't subscribed, so while you're here, just subscribe, do it. Let's jump straight into it. So as you can see, I've got a varied bunch of images across this composition, and what I'm going to start by doing is blending in our cutout of the player just in the background. I'm going to start with this is just going to be a mashup of something East related and a little bit funny with a movie style kind of poster within it. I like to have fun with the posters I make for Westy just because, you know, it gets engagement, the players have a laugh out of it, and it's good fun. So let's jump straight into it. What I'm going to do is going to start by going to basic, and I'm just going to knock the clarity up to around 50 and push that texture up the whole way to around 80, as well as increasing the contrast. I just want to bump up the exposure slightly to around plus 15. As we can see, we're getting a bit too harsh blue tones on the front of the kit. So I'm going to come to color mixer and I'm going to knock the hue down just slightly to around -7, as well as knocking the magentas and purples down a little bit. And then we are also going to increase the blues on the saturation and drag it down to our luminance, and as well play around until I get that Westy blue that I'm looking for. Like so. And we can see the difference that that makes within the colors. So now what we're going to do is we're going to hold down Control on our cutout and just mask it, and then come up to filter, go to other and select minimum, just because we're getting rid of this little harsh white tones around the outside that don't look very nice. And now what we're going to do is we're going to come to our adjustment layers, and when adjustment layers is open, we come to selective color, create a clipping mask, and come to our blues, and we're just going to try and get a little bit more of the light back into it, like so. Yeah, I think that's worked perfectly. For my next step, what I'm going to do is create a new layer and come to our gradients, reset the colors to black, and we're just going to make a diagonal gradient from both sides and then push it up slightly, just because we want the colors of Bryson just to be a little dark from the middle. We'll hold shift so it's immediately straight, like so. And there we go, we can just see it just blends the bottom of the graphic in a little bit more. For my very next step, what I'm going to do is come to solid color, and I'm going to grab the yellows from here and here, change it to the first yellows we grabbed, and then come down to color and press Control I so it inverts. And then we're going to very slowly draw the colors onto Bryson. Might just go a little bit stronger on the opacity, just so it's not that harsh kind of yellow we're getting. We're getting that really strong yellow coming across the graphic. Like so. Coming up from the trees. Just so it blends in a little more. And what I'm going to do is double click on the layer. With our inner shadow, we will use the second color that we selected. So the kind of more yellowy kind of color. We'll increase the size and change it to linear dodge add. Decrease the opacity like so. And we can just see again the difference that that kind of makes. And again, we actually might change this to different blending mode. Maybe just knock down the opacity slightly, just because we're not really getting the colors we're looking for. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that and then press Control Backspace. And then I'm going to decrease the opacity and just draw some yellow over the image like so. So it looks a little bit more blended. And then I might even just knock off some areas around the shoulders and a little bit on the face. For my next step, I'm going to hold down Control, press Control Shift and I, make a new layer. And then with the brighter kind of yellow selected, I'm going to hit Control Backspace. And then with linear dodge add selected as our blending mode, We'll move this over slightly, one piece each, like so. So we've got that highlights around the sides here. And then to create some separation from the image, what I'm going to do is knock up the flow to around 100% and opacity right down. And I'm just going to draw in some shadows just around the areas where the light actually isn't coming onto the graphic, just so it looks a little bit more realistic. And onto the areas that are already darkened by his face and stuff. What this does is just give the image and the graphic a bit more of a realistic effect. So we'll just continue doing that. I'm going to speed this process up. Now for my next step is what I'm going to do is I'm going to blur the very background part of it a bit, so where the kind of trees are, just because we want that separation between foreground and background. Keeping our opacity on 24%, we'll just get rid of the foreground that's blurred, maybe just knock it up to around 70%, and then get rid of some slight areas that we want to get rid of the Gaussian blur around. And we can just see the difference that that makes. Just separates the image from the background a little and really kind of focuses on our main graphic. And what we're going to do again is double click on the graphic, come to our size and increase the size of it, just because again we want that separation from the image from the background. Now that our main part of the composition is done, what I'm going to do is cut out the Easter Bunny ears from the graphic, and what we're going to do is we're going to put these on the player. Like so. What we might have to do is move Bryson. Bryson down slightly, maybe just a little bit more, just so we can fit these Easter Bunny ears in the graphic. And we might make them about that big. And what we'll do is we will make this a new smart object, and then we will warp the ears to this way kind of way, like so. Now what we'll do is with our hard round brush and with the black color selected, we will mask out and in the areas so it looks like it's shaped around his head, like so. And what we'll do is we'll actually drag this into the same image, and then we'll apply the exact same camera raw filters and everything onto it, just so everything looks the same and we've got the same effects running. Now what we'll do is with this layer above, we'll come back to our black brush, knock our flow down to around 20% and draw in some shadow, like so. And now we'll come back to Bryson or your player cutout, and just very carefully around the face, we're going to draw some undershadow just so it looks a little bit more realistic. Next, what we'll do is we'll again make this a smart object, create a new layer, and with the same orange selected, Control Shift and I, and then Control Alt and backspace, linear dodge add, and we'll add that same stroke kind of effect around the outside, just so we have consistency across the graphics. But what we don't want to do is have it kind of sitting under this under part. Here is fine because it's continuing the stroke across. But what we're going to have to do is we will copy these layers across and then Control and backspace. What we're going to have is we're going to have this middle part completely blue, and then the outside be that yellowish kind of color. Make sure we've got our white selected, and we'll draw on the yellow onto the kit, not the kit, the ears, like so. And now we will duplicate that, change this to the blue, a bit more up from here, a bit more down, there we go. Knock our flow all the way up, and then draw our blue in, just so we're still keeping the consistency of the blue across the graphic, like so. For our next step, what we're going to do is we're going to add in some Easter Bunny eggs down the front. But for this, we're going to come to Filter, Gaussian Blur, and we'll put in a radius of around 15 pixels. And we'll move them slightly to this side. We just don't really want the basket showing. And then we'll do the same thing for over here. But we'll move them behind. And then decrease the Gaussian blur to around 8.0. For our next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and drop the competition logos into the top right corner. Put the Northern League 1 logo there. And we might just put a little bit of outer glow behind it. We'll group our Easter Bunny eggs together, like so. And then we'll also group our logo so we have everything continuing. And also group the shadow so we know exactly where everything is. Now for my next step, I'm going to type in game day by coming to our rectangular marquee tool, selecting the whole frame and middling it. Now what we'll do is, again, we'll put some outer glow behind it, just so it's standing out from behind the text. We'll make it a little bit smaller, move it up. We actually might make it a little bit bigger so it repeats over the player's shoulders and looks a little bit more middle than usual. And we'll continue to move it up slightly. What I might actually do is increase the size of the player and then just move him down a little bit, just so he's taking up more of the graphic than it looks like. And then we'll chuck the text behind, get rid of the outer glow, knock down the fill, turn the stroke to around 4, actually probably to around 2. Duplicate it again, just so we have that repetitive running text of game day. And what we'll do again is put it up the front, convert it to a smart object, get our soft brush, change it to black, and we're going to move the Easter eggs slightly down just a little bit, just so I can chuck the logos in and some of the game details. And then we'll move this up. And then again, some of the text down, like so. Make sure we have actually all the text selected. There we go. I'm going to chuck a bit of noise on the background. So what I'm going to do is convert this to a new smart object and chuck some noise on the background like so. And we'll move this up slightly a little bit more. Now for my next step, I'm going to drag and drop the Westie logo in like so. And what I'm actually going to do is create a box just with our blues selected with the rectangle. Make sure it's all middled. Make it a little smaller, and we'll actually skew the rectangle box just so it looks a little better. Like so, and we'll just chuck some outer glow behind it. What we'll do is we'll make another spot for the Singleton logo to go in, but we'll keep this on white. I'm going to double check I've got the correct singleton logo. Yep, which I do. So we'll also drag and drop that singleton logo in. And then we'll skew the text as well, so it matches the graphic and the boxes that we've got going. Make it a tiny little bit smaller, like so. Now we'll group all the rectangles and everything together. Make sure it's chucked in the middle. Move it up. Chuck some outer glow behind the text so it's visible. Once again, probably move the eggs a little down. And I might chuck a color lookup layer on it just so it blends in a little bit better. Switch our brush to the yellow. Move this layer out and create a clipping mask. And we'll change these to color. What I'll actually do is make sure the Singo logo is within the box, just so we're not getting that weird kind of outlay within the graphic, just so it looks like it's inside the rectangle. Make this tiny little smaller and move it up. And then I will pop the match day details of the game in the graphic. So I've got to grab those quickly. Might do is just duplicate the shadow, which I've done, and move the text up slightly just so everything looks middled. I'll press Ctrl Shift Alt and E. Come to our color lookups, and I'm going to chuck a color lookup on it. We want something with this kind of film, kind of wintry kind of look. See if something works. Something that matches the colors. Don't mind this, so I might knock it to around 25%. What we're going to do is come to Camera Raw Filter now. I'm going to increase the clarity and the texture. Might decrease the saturation a little bit. Increase the contrast, knock up the exposure. We'll increase the grain. Decrease the vignetting. Come to color grading. I'm going to give it some reds. Reds and maybe a little bit of a blue tinge for the background for the highlights. We don't want too much contrast in color, so we'll make sure everything looks the same. And now we'll come back in and see how this looks. Looking good. And there we go. That's how I make this master graphic. If you guys enjoyed this video, please make sure you like, subscribe, tell me what you want to see next. See ya.